Bienvenidos a todos.
Welcome, everybody. This is a contest where we're going to hear new projects that are connected with museums. And we called participants. It was an open call. We had more than 26 projects, and we selected 5 of those that are going to be presented here in front of this audience and our jury. First, we have María Eugenia Salcedo Repolês. She's from Brazil. She's a specialist in education, and she directed the area of education in Inhotim for many years, 10 years. And then we have Deborah Mack. She works for the Smithsonian Institution, and she's working doing international affairs of the future Afro-American Museum of the Smithsonian. And Andrés Roldán, director of the Parque Explora from Medellín. They are going to be the jury.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for all of us to be here. I'm speaking on behalf of the 3 of us, and I hope the better project wins. The first presentation we're going to see is by Arturo, Martín, Mack, Fulle from the University of Lima in Peru. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to introduce my project, which is the Interpretation Center for Immigration in Peru. To start with, I wanted to say that this project could be adequate to any of our projects from Canada to Argentina, because all of us are coming up with an idea of nationality or identity, so we can have this idea of a Pan-American identity. And we all have a basis that says that this nation or this union is being formed because we are multicultural countries and we are a mix of cultures. The original cultures that brought elements from all the peoples that immigrated in our lands, and we can see this as from the 16th century with the European conquest. Unfortunately, there's a common problem too, which is our societies are still fixed on certain problems such as discrimination, for example, racial discrimination, socioeconomical discrimination, or gender preference discrimination. For us, there is a tool that could be part of the solution to this common problem that we have as countries in the Americas, which is the creation of interpretation centers or immigration museums that tell the story of our idiosyncrasy as the sum of the original cultures and foreign cultures. We already have a positive background about this. In Europe, you have the museum in Paris, and there's a room in the museum in Germany, and in Latin America we have important examples such as the museum in Sao Paulo and the MUNI in Montevideo, the youngest museum, a museum in Buenos Aires, also a museum of immigration that is changing venues, but still it's a current proposal. The objective of a museum of the immigration is to teach the population about their origins and form an identity, a national identity that comes from the summation of cultures. Our objective is to reach the young people because they need to know more about their identity, and they are the ones where we see discrimination as a deeply rooted issue. And that's our target, is university and school children. And also the visitors should be included here. I think that an immigration museum, if there are foreigners visiting, and if these foreigners have had or have been lucky enough to live in one of the countries where you have migrants coming to Peru or one of our countries, is going to feel identified and close to the country they are visiting. The tourists then should be the target for this kind of center or museum. The name of our museum, and this is the logo, a beacon. We want the museum and the center to be a beckoning place, a home to feel identified, and the name is based on a phrase by Carlos Palma, a traditionalist from Peru, and it's a phrase that we use to say that we are not a pure race or a pure culture, and we don't have a single identity. We come from the Incas, and we come from the foreigners also. We say Inca and Mandinga. That's a phrase. So it refers to the Incas and the immigration. And we wanted to have this name that was a synthesis, and we came up with the word idem, a word that we all know, which means that we are all identical despite our heterogeneity. In the case of Peru, we want to come up with this center because despite the fact that today Peru has a number of elements such as food and tourism, which are very important currents, we have a stable economy, and so despite these fireworks that make us feel really proud, our society is divided in classes and is a racist society. In the case of Peru, I chose a very special place to create this center, to have our museum, which is the district of Miraflores. Why Miraflores? Because Miraflores is a district or the area in Lima with most tourists from within and from outside the country. So it's a very good place for the two target audiences that I'm talking to. And also, the place in Miraflores that I chose is a traditional park called the Parque Raimundi, with elements that make you think about the idea of harbor. And the concept that I have for the architecture is for it to resemble a ship, so that people visiting this place travel in time as the migrants traveled in space in the 16th century coming to Peru. Miraflores is also a good place because it's a tourist hub within Peru, and also it has a network of museums. The Interpretation Center could complete this network of museums, where we have the Archaeological Museum of Guyana, we have the Museum Andrés Ovidio Cáceres, which is a military museum, and then the site for memory. Regarding the architecture, as I said, it's a ship as the transportation for the migrants coming in the country. These are some of the views of the ideal architecture for our center. It can be adapted depending on the budget, and it will have different areas and rooms, 11 rooms, and I cannot mention everything, but the idea is to have a story, a narrative that is a chronological line through 6 centuries. The first part will be a room showing the origin with the aboriginal or indigenous origin of the pre-Hispanic cultures, and then go through the whole history of Peru, mentioning the different migrant groups from Europe, Asia, Africa, and also mention that each room should have 2 concepts. One is saying why the migrants came, and this is because we need to be critical, because a lot of immigration caused terror and suffering to the groups that were coming and also to the locals. But also there's a second stage, which is showing how the 2 currents merged to form the identity of Peru, showing the museography through infographies and social networks and touch screens and current technologies. And in the end, I wanted to say that people who come to our center are going to continue coming because they feel identified and they feel close, and they should own the idea of the place to come to the final objective, which is to come up with a national identity. And in my last few seconds, I want to say that this is the right time for this kind of center, because we are the last country to be independent in South America, and it's almost the bicentennial of our independence, so it's the right time to get funding. And if I cannot do it, I will invite all of you to come and start a plan like this and meet together for this goal. Thank you.
¿Tienen alguna pregunta?
Do you have any questions? I have a question. The origin of the museum stems from some sort of collection that has been compiled in the university, or is there some sort of support that will allow the creation of the museum? Because you talked about museology and interactivity and infographics, but is there a set of objects? Well, the project initially was meant to be an interpretation center. There's no collection. It's a personal initiative. But given the possibilities to have a collection, through the help of people who own objects, who have photographs or documents, we could change the museum into a center. So we call it both ways.
Question: if this is based on objects in representing indigenous people in their self-representation, how would you accomplish that for an historic period?
Okay, en el caso de lo que viene a ser nuestra primera sala,
in the case of our first room, the room that shows Peru as a culture born from the originary cultures, the idea is to show information. Peru has an advantage. Our museums, most of our museums are archaeological museums. So to have a collection within the center or as part of our center would be an element that would be problematic in terms of costs, in terms of personnel or staff. And when you own objects, unfortunately, I am an archaeologist by profession. Archaeological museums have a problem, and that is that they only showcase the object. I want people to understand that object and to relate to it. So in these specific First Nations rooms, I would like there to be information and not only objects. Just a quick question, because you mentioned Miraflores, the neighborhood. That's a neighborhood that is visited by many tourists, but you said that your main target are students. I wanted to understand that. When it comes to tourists, well, the internal tourism within Peru and external tourism goes through Lima or Cusco. Lima, Miraflores is a very good location for local and international tourists, but it's a central area for Lima citizens, which lots of the inhabitants of Peru are concentrated around Lima. Could we modify this? Yes. Could there be a different location? Well, yes. But Miraflores would be the ideal location, the best venue. But this center will be a part of a structure that is being put together. It's one of the many art galleries and museums that are already in place. Paula Caballero Aguilera from the Museum of Visual Arts in Chile. Good afternoon. I'm from the Museum of Visual Arts, Contemporary Arts Museum from Chile. And I would like to tell you that as per the last surveys that were conducted in my country, 64.3% of people do not attend contemporary art museums. Why not? For two reasons mainly. First, because they don't understand them. And secondly, because there is no time for them to visit the museums. So, I thought that we had to do something about it. There was a problem with the consumption of contemporary art, and we had to find a way of reversing the situation. So in the neighborhood where I work, I realized that there are 3 main cultural centers that work with contemporary arts. So my question is, why don't we work together? Why don't we collaborate with each other? Why don't we get together and struggle against this public that is reluctant to visiting us? And I always wonder, why is it so difficult for us to work in collaboration? The answer is in our classrooms. They taught us to compete against each other. We were taught to work through competition and not collaboration, given that we are people that we like living with each other. So instead of competing for public, why don't we co-inspire, collaborate through an inter-museum program? Why don't we work together, the 3 of us? And so that we can share the audiences and so that we can train new audiences in contemporary arts and to improve and increase consumption of contemporary arts. Let me tell you something that happened to me last night in the National Museum of Fine Arts. A friend of mine told me that she visited the museum with her mom, and her mom told her, Flavia, why don't you tell me why that person didn't place all the different lights of the same color? My friend told her, Mom, that's art, that's contemporary art, it's current art. There's a reason why. Can't you tell me what the reason is? And she tried to find a solution to that. And that's where I said, that's the basis of my idea, the question. Yolanda, my friend's mother, had a question, and that question can help me find a link with contemporary arts. So I thought about current technological devices. We have to become friends of the technological devices. I thought about a digital platform that would act as a game and that will allow me to develop scientific thought, and that will allow me to better use time, because we only have limited space, so we can transform these limited bubbles of time in knowledge. The idea is about developing a game where you can compete against yourself. You can. I'm sure that most of you have played Candy Crush. And that game makes you want to keep competing against yourself. So through different questions, what you're going to do is to contribute to having the player want to play more and keep adding credits. So together with the educational experts of the different museums, maybe we can take pictures or spaces of the different museums and to put together a list of questions. Induction, deduction questions. The audience will answer these questions, and as they do, they keep adding credits. Once they get their credits, their total credits, when they have a final score, as in Candy Crush, you have to invite somebody else through the social media. You need to invite somebody else to participate in this game. But in order to be accepted, you have to add a question. Why is this important? So that the next person will become a prosumer. You'll be a person who will consume the contents of the game that you have contributed to create. In this way, once you get a score on the screen, you will get a prize. And who doesn't like them? So that prize will be a loyalty card that you have to go get to one of the different 3 locations. It could be any of those. And once you have achieved a certain score, you can visit the location to get a stamp. I also realized that there were other cultural industries, such as bookstores, movie theaters, and theaters. So whenever you fill out a line of stamps, you can get, for example, a ticket to the movie theater, a ticket to the theater, or an entry to the bookstore. So, fidelization or loyalty programs and culture consumption. Today's art is tomorrow's heritage. We need to collaborate rather than competing. We need to work as a community in the interest of culture. Thank you.
Paula.
Hello, Paula. What happens if I lose? If I answer the question wrong, I don't accumulate points. And am I telling the user, what am I telling the user when I'm saying, okay, you're wrong? The thing is, the idea is to provide incentives to continue answering. I have a 17-year-old and she's a fan of gaming. And there are questions that pop up and she comes and asks the questions. During dinner she says, what are the colors of the flag of Argentina? So you help her answer the questions and she moves on. She moves on to the next level. Can I ask another question? So does that mean that what happened with your friend's mom in the museum was a number of correct or incorrect questions? No, I think there are no correct or incorrect questions. The questions, when it's induction questions, they lead to a description, for example. So the idea is for the people playing the game, the question should have to do with what they are observing. And also, what is it that you can deduce from what you're watching?
Hello, Paula. I appreciate that that this is based on initial audience research. Could you clarify the stakeholder groups or age groups or visitor profiles this project would attract?
The user profile is young people. Young people and young adults. I would say youngsters, but teenagers in general do not come to a museum, at least in my country, unless they are part of a school visit. So for young people, what I want to do is to form them and train them for cultural consumption. In the case of adults, we have very little time from your home when you commute from home to the work. So while people are on the bus, for example, they could be playing this game on their electronic devices, portable devices, such as the cell phone. So why not, instead of having Candy Crush, why not learn something else?
Thank you.
How would the teams at the museum would be involved with this proposal? Who works in the museum devoting time to this? I'm thinking about the educational department in the museum, because at least in my country, the guides, because in many museums they are not called educators, they are called guides, and they conduct a guided tour. And I think that the role of educators is much more than being a guided or a guide in a guided tour. There should be a number of questions that come up from visitors when you're visiting the museum and you want to ask those questions. So I think they should be the ones producing this, the questions in this game. So you give educators a bigger role to play. Thank you, Paula. Now we're going to call Marcela Giorla. She's from the Museum of the Toy in Argentina, and Analía Bernardi is from Ferrowhite Museum Workshop, also from Argentina. Can you hear the sound of the railroad? Good afternoon. Let me take a minute of your attention to give you, directly from the Museum of Toys in Boulogne and Ferrowhite in Bahía Blanca, hear the sound of the railroad. In this opportunity, this is a museum of the toy that is ready to circulate in real trains. It's a rolling museum, so we all want this commitment with social issues, and also it is cheap. You would ask, why, having all of this technology and different means of transportation, why would children prefer to still play with steam locomotives? Why? Because their imagination goes on a train. For you to know about the history of railroads in Argentina, the first trains that came to Buenos Aires and to Argentina were in the line Belgrano Sur in 1857. Then they were foreigners, and then a century later, where the company Ferrocarriles Argentinos was launched. I'm going to give you tin trains that symbolize the trains that transport people and fruit from the different latitudes of Argentina, and also the trains that were super modern, but then they became extinct. For just a little bit of your money, I'm going to give you something to finish with the boring trips, and you can take a trip on a train with this miniature collection. If the people don't go to the museum will come to the people.
Por una módica suma y un voto de confianza de ustedes, se van a llevar varias vitrinas portátiles.
You are going to take 30 trains that show different times, the brochures, and a trip that goes from Plaza Constitución to Bahía Blanca. And this guide is the street salesman with more than 30 years of experience in trains. Now my assistants, Analía and Marcela, will answer any questions that you may have about our collection. So, to summarize, from one side to the other of the province of Buenos Aires, Ferrowhite and the Toy Museum show you the sound of the railroad. This is a collaboration project in November during 14 hours, which is the time that it takes to join Constitución with Bahía Blanca by train. This project is trying to generate a moving museum or a rolling museum on real trains. We are going to have a moving display and a number of bags. We are going to have salespeople led by Eduardo, and they are going to take the collection of the toy museum to all of the commuters and the passengers on the train. It will show different styles of toy trains, which reflect the history of the real trains that we've seen in Argentina. During the commute, we're going to give different elements to put together, and we're going to interview the passengers and also record this on video. Probably you wonder why us, because Ferrowhite is the right museum to look at the train toys with the right eyes. And because together we can cover the history of trains in our country and go to the heart of a toy, joining together reality and fantasy to show how history with a capital H is also part of little stories. This project has to do with the resources of both of our museums and also has to do with reimagining the museum, and it's as cheap as just a train ticket. Okay, anything else to say? Yes. Don't accept any imitations. This is not to be found in Europe, and in the United States it's more expensive. Do you want to buy it? Yes. The trains are sold on the train, but the independent experience of buying merchandising, is that possible? No, the trains are not to be bought. This is just an itinerant or moving exhibition, a traveling exhibition. That's the idea. I would like to know if someone in the audience wants to ask a question, just to change gears for a minute. Yes, my question is, have you thought of a device to record this? To record the comments and the reactions and everything that will happen on the train with the traveling exhibition? Yes, the idea is to conduct interviews and have photographs and video recorded to record the experience of the passengers in bringing together fantasy and reality of finding the toys in a real train.
Va por ahí. ¿Qué pasa con ese material?
Thank you. Another question. What happens with that material? The video and the interviews, are they going to be part of another exhibition, or is it going to be shown in Bahía Blanca and Buenos Aires? Or, well, that is going to go to the Facebook wall of both museums, so it will be available for virtual visitors. And we're going to show it through the blogs and the web pages of the museums. And once the exhibition gets to Bahía Blanca, it will be exhibited in one of the museum rooms in Bahía Blanca. Have you had any experience like this before? Together, you mean, or, well, together or separate? The idea of traveling and having a traveling exhibition, or other projects? Well, together, it's the first time that we're going to work together in this type of exhibit. It came up after a TIPA lab in 2013, and the director of our museum, the Toy Museum, came up with this idea, and she told someone in Bahía Blanca about this idea, and the person said, okay, you should tell Nicolás, the director of the Ferrowhite Railway Museum, and that's how the project came into being. There are collaborative experiences with other museums too. I wanted to ask, who is going to be able to ride on that train? Well, the problem is the capacity of Ferrowhite. The trains are getting smaller and smaller, but we can get 3 cars together. Is that an active train line? Yes, it's the only train line that takes passengers to Bahía Blanca. It's the only service. That's why we're saying it has few cars.
muy pocos vagones.
And in the old days, there was a dining car and a sleeping car, and now it takes 14 hours, and it used to be 7. And the advantage is that it's very inexpensive tickets, but and we can go to a population that would normally not go to a museum. So the museum comes to the people.
Estamos en charlas. Sí, tenemos contacto.
Hola.
I wanted to ask if this could be expanded to all trains going to the different provinces, the trains with a long trip. Sometimes you're 24 hours inside the train, and this could be the opportunity to interact with something that is entertaining and very original. Could you do it in different trains? Well, that would be another extension project. And I think the limitation is the resources, but it would be great to articulate this with other museums, toy museums or train museums in different cities like Tucumán or Bariloche, which are far away from Buenos Aires. Marcela, Analía, and Jorge. Sorry, I keep calling you the wrong name. Okay, call me by my nickname. It's Cacho. Thank you.
Now, we will give the floor to Paulina Guarnieri from PROA Foundation and the Network of Educators, REMAC. Good afternoon. We're here gathered today because many interesting changes have been happening in museums. These changes have to go along with collaboration and exchanges. I think that this is one of our pending items in Latin America. Instead of looking inwards, we're looking towards international models and experiences that are relevant, and they can show us the direction to follow. It could happen, too, that they become so interesting as distant or inaccessible, something similar to what's happening with this monument on the screen. We can think that this is a problem of perspective, so depending on how we adjust ourselves, we can capture the essence of those work methodologies and the concepts of those projects, and we can apply them to our routine work. Sometimes they work really well. Or this may happen, where things are not working that well, or even worse. If we try to adjust things, or if we try to force those models to specific interests and needs when there is no coincidence. As I said before, in Latin America, we could act as relatively isolated cells because we fail to have a broader vision. This is not a problem of perspective, but rather of our visual field. Can we see what we're doing? Can we share what we're doing? So what I'm thinking is in creating an exchange space that can be extended in time and that is a truly deep exchange. So it would be very good to continue the exchanges that are being held right now in time. For example, if I know that there's a museum that is engaging in a very interesting project, a Latin American museum, if I look for that information on the web, I might find materials related to the dissemination of the proposal. I don't know if this happened to you, but this is usually the case. But they won't tell me much about the core of the project, the heart of the project, what were the objectives, what were the links with institutional policy, what was the work methodology. As a museum professional, that's what I'm interested in. And we also should take into account that many Latin American museums have no web pages, so many of our colleagues cannot even tell us what they are working on. This is why I thought about a proposal which is quite simple and specific and cheap. so that we could start looking at each other. And that is building a virtual platform for Latin American projects related to museums. On the one hand, one of the main actions of this platform would be a project base and program base. We're talking about specific programs that are being carried out right now or that were carried out in the past. All independent professionals or institutions that are willing to do so may upload their own projects in this section. I would like to talk about the format needed to upload projects. It would be good to make it so that it's not sufficient to say I did a workshop for children with this many participants, but rather that the format would force me to tell the work methodology, the objectives, the development, if I knew the audience beforehand or not, if there was some means of assessment and what were the results of those assessments. This platform, in that sense, is thought as a forum for professionalization and one that will allow us to have critical thought, both for those who are sharing their projects and those who are receiving those projects. We could look for projects per category, such as type of museum, work area, country, interest areas, or keywords such as memory and curatorship, education plus leadership, or any other combination that can come to your mind. There's something important, though. This platform will also allow people to share their ideas when they have had truly creative ideas. So it will be a proposal and idea base. So the idea is not just to deal with specific projects. As professionals, sometimes we have ideas, but we cannot implement them in the institutions where we're working due to lack of time, resources, or interest on the part of the institution we work for. In the case of independent professionals, they might need to be contacted with an institution that is working on that topic. So the interesting thing here would be that ideas might be turned into reality, or we could get connected to implement them. There will be a resource reservoir space, professional profiles, fora, and a section for highlighted proposals that users could vote, or maybe experts that would like to select best practices. In this way, this network that would be quite limited at the beginning will become a horizontal forum that will award us visibility and will allow us to acknowledge what we do and what our colleagues do. To sum up, if you answer yes to any of the following questions, this project might be of interest to you. Do you have a good idea in mind? Do you want to share your projects? Are you interested in knowing what we're doing? So this is a platform or a social network? Well, it's a platform like a project reservoir, like the space, which could be linked to other platforms that will, like Google, that can host, for example, forums. It could be, or Moodle, it could be connected to LinkedIn, so different platforms could be combined based on the different objectives. This reservoir of projects and experiences using the DSpace format, and we can combine that. I don't think that forums should be open as the platform. Anyone can access the projects and the ideas, but discussion groups maybe that would be different. You should be logged on to enter into this other space. So it would be a sort of combination of different platforms depending on the objectives we have in mind. Are there any precedent work that has been carried out before in that direction? There are many work networks. For example, I'm a part of a network of museum educators in Argentina. I know that there's also a network for teachers, but they do not upload projects with the format I was telling you about. And they are quite specific for specific areas. There's a network for university museums, for example. Sometimes they share materials, and they have certain elements in common, but they do not specifically upload projects. And in my opinion, what's interesting about this is that it has to be Latin American for communication purposes. And on the other hand, the fact that it will cover different fields and different museums. Because when networks are more specific, and museums are more specific, if what we're aiming at is a cross-discipline approach through keywords, maybe I can come across a project of a different field, but that is also focusing on my points of interest. I don't know if that's what you asked me. Well, I learned something about networks after working with them for a long time, and that is that networks are not predetermined, but they are rather the consequence of something that is already going on. So my question is there something going on that will motivate everyone else to say, well, let's gather and do this? Well, I think that maybe we can create an alliance, and let me give you an example. This network will not only be a virtual network. TIPA Foundation has a database with lots of institutions and persons of Latin America. Many different institutions that we work with in different collaboration work. They also have databases, so we can work through alliances or partnerships with existing networks and institutions, and this would come to supplement that. It wouldn't overlap. But if you want to further promote this, we could work by using some snowball strategy, where there might be different invitations to kick off the pace.
The last presentation is going to be by Yasmin Guerrero Reyes, an independent researcher from Mexico.
Hola, buenas tardes.
I'm Jasmine. Good afternoon. I feel a little bit lonely up here. I should have brought some Aztec dancers to help me. Anyway, I'm here to talk about diversity in general and the need to work on diversity in museums. But before I start talking about my topic, I would like to tell you the story of Mr. Isidro. Mr. Isidro, he's Isidro Velázquez, he's 73 and he lives in the southeast of Tabasco in Mexico, and he, together with his neighbor, are the last two living speakers of the Zapaneco language. He and Manuel had a fall-off many years ago, and they insulted each other, and they ended the friendship. So the language that they both speak was extinct because they are living, but they are not talking to each other. So that's why I'm here to tell you that friendships are very fragile. Please raise your hands, everybody who speaks English in the room. Spanish, sorry. And English now? Yes. Okay, leave your hands up. everybody. French, Portuguese, hands up, everybody. Now look at each other. We have our hands in the air, all of us. Now, who speaks some other language? Anybody? Okay, just a few of you. That's very representative of what happens with linguistic diversity in the world. So, according to UNESCO, in the world we have 6,000 languages. And here in this room shows what happens in the world. 97% of the people in the world speak 93% of the languages in the world. So there's a 3% that speak 5,700 languages. Every 14 days, one language goes extinct, and if we follow, if it continues like this, we are going to have just 50% of the languages. Mexico is a multicultural country. This is shown in the Constitution. It's one of the 8 nations which concentrates 50% of the languages in the world. We have 7 million speakers of languages that represent 664 linguistic variants. And to know what happens with extinction, we had 15,000 Patagos, and in 28 years it was reduced to 2%. This year we only have 107. Other languages have 21 speakers, 14, 12, 3, 2, which is quite serious, and 144 languages are endangered languages. The disappearance of a language implies the disappearance of a conception of the universe and the concept of the ancestors. The indigenous groups and the communities represent a past that links us to all together, but it's also a present that is being reproduced on a daily basis, and these practices are reproduced from one generation to the other through words and not books. What can we do? There are several movements to reconstitute the languages and preserve them, but this is not enough. We have to have speakers that want to continue talking. So, as museums, they are recommending us to have pilot projects and to collaborate with the local resources. That is to say, speakers in this case. I'm asking to have a traveling exhibit about the speakers of languages in Mexico, whose objectives would be to promote non-speaker languages, to change their activities regarding linguistic diversity, in the speakers to generate an empowering tool, especially for youngsters, and in general to contribute to the recognition of cultural diversity. The messages would be to say that indigenous people are not static, they evolve, and that the heritage is alive and lives in each of the speakers with a face and a name. And all of the voices should be heard. How are we going to do this? In 2 phases. The field research is to compile all of the voices, and local training so that they are mediators of the experience with their neighbors. I need to skip this because I don't have a lot of time, and this will bring new challenges because it's a kind of exhibit that has never been done. This is a crucial issue that deals with diversity, but it's never been done. So this could bring some difficulties, but let's take a look at the opportunities rather. In our population, it will connect the population, and then there are different organizations in Mexico doing this, but they do not cooperate with one another. And this is a good opportunity to bring the museum beyond the term of inclusion. Let's imagine a museum that is not inviting you to come in, but enables the construction of new knowledge, actually, or building new knowledge. It's a really democratic experience. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Can you give me 30 seconds? I can tell you what happened with Mr. Isidro. He went to Stanford. James A. Fox, a professor in Stanford, came to Mexico, actually, to try to mend the friendship between Isidro and Manuela, and they did become friends again. And with the help of a German foundation, they opened their school to teach Ayapaneco, and they are the teachers, so that children learn the language. Your diagnosis is very clear. Why is an exhibit the means to do this? Well, we have all the tools regarding mediation and interpretation of the legacy, and there's a methodology. And people think that indigenous communities are not open to new experiences, and sometimes it's like new knowledge doesn't permeate them, but this is all wrong. Sometimes the museum is seen as a dead space, and so it will be very nice to look at something that looks dead, but talk about the fact that they are alive in a space that is alive. Something that is constantly between boredom, but the idea is to try and say that this is alive. So it's an exhibit where in Mexico, in the whole country, and if we can, we could go somewhere else. But what kind of venues would you have this exhibit? In communities where most of the speakers are indigenous, members of indigenous communities. So it's not necessarily for museums, but for the communities. Well, I would like to do it first in a museum in the city of Mexico, because there are many speakers of different languages there. Because in the city, they live a process of acculturation. So it would be valuable to start it in the city of Mexico.
Follow-up question. You said a number of projects that have been collecting language from indigenous native language speakers. How would your project, but you said they don't cooperate together. How does your project leverage this existing data? How would you draw this in?
It's not that they never collaborate, but they are not talking all the time. It is very important because they do have a broad background of documentation in video and audio of the extinct and the living cultures, and the first way of collaborating is through their experts and the compilations that they already have. Bringing all of them together, and from the institutional academic point of view, let's think about the first way to work, and then go to the communities and get them, reinforce them from them, whether this is the right way to do it. But and also because they have the money, of course. I have another question. Jasmine, what is fed back into the communities? You do the exhibit, it goes to different places, and then is there any feedback value? Well, yes, it happens to many anthropological projects. They do all the research, and then what? There are promises, but nothing else. Here, we could have an added value, which is the fact that they are going to get the training in mediation themselves, and they are going to be the guides for the rest of the community, telling the stories, young and old, leading the whole community through the experience. So they have the value, they keep the value of participating in building something bigger and seeing themselves reflected in a big community. Even though in the town we could have 7 speakers, there are 20 million Mexicans that live the same realities and experiences. Thank you very much. We have no more time. There was another question, but there's no more time. Okay, first of all, a big round of applause for all of the participants. For the 5 projects, and the intention from the TIPA Foundation in organizing this session was to invite the professionals in different museums to put together a project and prepare the structure, and also stand on the stage and present it in a short period of time, as is many times the case in our daily practice. We are naturally pitching projects all the time to the authorities of the museums or investors or sponsors. So that's the purpose of this invitation, and these 5 incredible projects are proof that this is possible, and it's a good way of thinking about ideas that will not be just left in a shelf as just the idea. But as happens many times also in the real world, the jury should deliberate now and select the winner. We're going to crown them, which is going to be used as a symbol of faith. Just to be part of these 5 selected projects is already a seal of faith or trust. And one, the winner, selected by the jury, is going to be crowned by reimagining the museum so that it happens, that they make it happen. Are you ready with your conclusion? No. I thought it was a telepathic decision. Leave your mics here and go to the back.
Thank you for waiting. First, wanted to thank you, and we wanted to thank all the participants, the 5 different projects, for your time, your dedication, and the explanation that you gave us. As Juana said, we feel that every single project reflects the energy, the desire to do something more that you have. We feel it present in every single project, and we wanted to say something to each one of those, and then we are going to announce the winner. First, in any order, Paula from Chile, we really liked your proposal. Oh, I'm sorry, you should all come to stage. I forgot to tell you that. It's too many things that I have to remember. Come closer.
Nos gustó mucho la idea que has mirado a tu alrededor y has visto
We liked the idea that you looked around and you understood how to collaborate with different persons, different institutions. We feel that there's a lot to work on the project, and it's a type of platforms that are currently in existence in different fields. So maybe just as collaborating with other museums and other social networks, it could be a project that could pick up pace. Arturo, we were very interested in your proposal that calls on an international topic that is from Peru, but also it impacts us all. We were concerned in relation to where in the life of the project you are. So I think that there's a little bit more to to work on.
Los amo a todos. No, no.
I have the worst part, okay? I love you all for doing this to me.
Paulina, también nos pareció muy interesante la idea de una plataforma.
Paulina,
Así como decía Paula,
your
es una
idea of having a virtual platform is very important, as you were saying. This is something that is already working, but we feel that you're missing on telling us what are the strategies necessary to make this network sustainable, not virtually, but also in reality. Writing a text, the time assigned to it, we feel that you should focus in that sense in order to carry out a project like the one you described. Yasmin, we liked very much your proposal in that there's a research involved and the diagnosis is wonderful. We can see the richness in all the data that you put together. What's missing for us is how will you get associated with one or more associations to add an institutional element to this project, or maybe to clarify whether this is going to be an exhibition or any other format so that it comes more tangible. The research part, we feel that it was very, very nice, and we agree. The last project that was very interesting to us as well is Marcela, Analía, and Cacho. We feel that you're at a point in the process, at a state in the process, that is hard to get to, and that's when things are in not only in your mind or in a concept or on paper, but it's in your body. You have incorporated the idea and it becomes more real. That was interesting. Well, a challenge is how will this team work together? We haven't had time to ask about the challenge of working as a team, but we believe that you were more integrated in that sense. Without further ado, we wanted to. I want that crown myself, actually. I want to have one. The crown goes to you. You are the winners.
Bueno, pero además, de verdad...
Also, let me tell you,
Quería decirles a todos, perdón, me olvidé una cosa, siempre me olvido algo, que estamos todos, Andrés, Deborah y yo, disponibles para...
well, I wanted to say something to all of you.
Tenemos muchas cosas para conversar.
Andrés, Deborah, and myself, we're available to talk to you if you want to have a conversation. We didn't have sufficient time, so that's something that we wanted to tell you. Want to have a conversation over coffee afterwards? We are more than willing to talk to you about your projects, because we will all win in that sense.
Y una cosa más, De verdad, cuando planteamos esta idea de la coronación,
One other thing.
corona simbólica y un premio
When we
simbólico y
put together the idea of having this crowning event, the crown was going to be symbolic and the prize was going to be symbolic. Please stay. But as we always say, collaborations lead to growth and improvement. So Williams Foundation joined us, an Argentine foundation, and they proposed to have a monetary award of 20,000 pesos. So that's what they are going to take home.